This is a short video about how I would like to see some improvements made to the frame environment. When modeling, the frame environment is absolutely excellent. The various ways in which you can go about creating the frames, the way in which you have so much flexibility about how the frame is put together, it's an excellent product. However, I feel it's let down considerably when it comes to putting those frames into the drawing environment. Here I've got a frame, and all we get listed is the original frame component name, and it doesn't really help me when I bring that into a drawing. I know that through occurrence properties we can add a part number and a part description or a part title, and then that can also be pulled through into the drawing environment. So here part 3 and 4 were the actual frame component parts. That side of it works quite well. Here I've got the using my standard drawing template, I can bring in the assembly number and the assembly title, just as I do with any other assembly. However, to get the information from the occurrence properties, I had to bring in both the drawing number for the components in the drawing that weren't a frame component, and also the occurrence property. This meant that I cannot give a document number to the original frame component, otherwise I end up with 2 numbers in here instead of 1. The same applies to the description. I've got the drawing description as well as the drawing title, and again I can't give the original frame component a title, because then it would bring up 2 titles. It would have the original frame component title and then the occurrence property title that I gave it. So there's one area where although there is a workaround and it works reasonably well, it's still not a very tidy way of doing it. However, when it comes to individual frame components, like in this drawing, this is drawing part number 3, as we had back in here. But to be able to produce this, I had to actually dismantle the original template. If I go into the template here, you can see that both the document number and the title have been taken out. So if I'm using my standard template, it means that I've either got to create a new standard template, or I've got to cut the one up that I'm currently using. Then I have to bring in a call out, which, if I turn the arrow on, is connected to the actual components, the only way that you can bring an occurrence property into the drawing. Then you have to lock this drawing view down, because if I don't, and I move the drawing view, then my title block data moves as well, which you don't want to happen. So this has to be locked down to prevent any movement. Not only does this information difficult to bring into the drawing environment, but if we go back to our assembly and we go to our data management and property manager, there's nothing listed in here as to part number 3 or part number 4. So when I'm adding in new parts, I can't tell whether that part number is already in use. And some people actually use automatic part numbering, so that when they bring a new part number in, it is automatically incremented for them. You wouldn't be able to do that with frame environment, because it wouldn't be able to know what the part numbers were from inside the occurrence property. And if we go into reports, and again there's nothing listed in here to indicate that any of these frame components even exist. So the frame environment, although it's created inside the assembly, it's actually an assembly of parts, and in the modeling environment, in here, it works perfectly and you can create whatever you like. However, to get that information into the drawing area is an absolute pain, and I think that that's where Solid Edge could do a lot of work to enhance that. The idea or my job basically is to create things in here, but my customer doesn't want a 3D model as such. My customer wants a drawing, and my job is to be able to produce these drawings as quickly as possible. So I don't want to go to the trouble of creating a complex frame inside the model here, and then have to resave that as an assembly so that I can strip out all these as individual parts, then go through, rename all of those parts, then bring it into the drawing environment. That's just adding too much work to an already overworked or an already high workload. What I'd like to see in the frame environment is similar to this, where it would group together some components that were the same. So here I've got a group showing the top and bottom, which are identical parts, and grouping the sides together, which again are identical parts. If, however, I change my design and I put a hole in here, now this part is no longer the same as this, I would expect just the same as it does in the synchronous environment with holes, is it would take that part out of that group and put it into a new group. And that way I'd be able to keep track of the individual components that were in my frame. And it would also mean that if they were grouped by their weight, their length, their mass, I would be able then to name those components. So I just name this one the once, and it would copy down into here. And that way, if you get very large complex frames, you're not having to go through every single component, seeing which ones were similar as you were going through and naming them. So I hope this all makes sense. I really enjoy using the frame environment. I use it a lot, but it is very frustrating when I have to bring that information through into the drawing environment. And at the end of the day, a frame is simply an assembly of components, just as an assembly of any parts put together are. We don't treat an assembly of parts the same way we do with frames, by having the one part named in separate ways. So I'd like people's feedback on this. I would really like to see a change here. It would really give some power to the frame environment.